My name is Ali, I'm a doctor and YouTuber.
I'm Taymor, I'm a data scientist and writer.
And you're listening to Not Overthinking,
the weekly podcast where we think about happiness, creativity, and the human condition.
Hello and welcome back to Not Overthinking. Taymor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Ali. How are you?
I'm doing good. I've just come off a 3 days on call for obstetrics and gynecology, so saved a few lives and brought a few babies into the world with lots of help.
Nice.
And then you went to work.
Oh, Jake, well done. So that is our special guest for this week's episode, and that is Jake. Jake, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience now that you've chimed in already?
Hello there, I'm Jake, also an F2 doctor. Don't save quite as many lives as Ali on my day job, but we can always try, can't we?
Awesome. So a couple of bits of housekeeping before we dive into the episode. Not Overthinking now has a YouTube account where we'll post updates.
Do we? We have a YouTube account? No way.
Oh, sorry. No. I meant Twitter accounts. we now have a Twitter
we should have
account.
a YouTube account.
Yeah, we'll do that at some point. Anyway, Twitter account at NOverthinking. So Noverthinking. Look, it was the best thing that was available. Follow us on there to get updates when we release episodes, if episodes are going to be delayed, if we're going to take a break. All that stuff will be posted on the Twitter account. So give us a follow at NOverthinking on Twitter.
Yeah, also, if you've got comments and feedback and stuff about the podcast, it's infinitely easier for us to reply to tweets than it is to reply to emails. So please send in your messages and stuff via Twitter, if possible. If it's like a really long message and you're happy to share it, then you can just like write it out in your notes app and then kind of screenshot it and then post it on Twitter as an image as like a reply to us. That'll be pretty ideal. But yeah, definitely follow us on Overthinking.
Awesome. And before we get into the actual topic of the episode, I had a bit of social interaction today that I wanted to analyze with the two of you. So today perfect. I had brunch with a group of people. I thought it was going to be me and my co-founder and one of our friends, but it turned out to be like 7 people in total. Because I think the friend invited like two of his friends. Or rather, one of his friends, and she invited one of her friends. And then Lucas invited his girlfriend, and she invited one of her friends. And so there was like 7 of us.
Whoa.
And
it sounds like there were more girls than guys here.
Yeah. So that's what I want. No, that's not what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was I was sort of thinking about the dynamic. And I think I've come up with a reasonable heuristic, which is that I think it's less optimal when large proportions of sort of the group don't know each other. So I think for basically everyone in the group, at least half of the rest of the group were complete strangers. They were meeting for the first time. And so I think it's kind of a strange dynamic when it's like a couple of people know each other, most people don't know each other at all, and then you kind of have to figure out like the right conversation that's sort of appropriate given that you know one person and you don't know the 5 people and all this kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Have you guys been in that kind of situation?
So do you think that's worse than everyone equally not knowing each other at all?
It's probably marginally better, but I think the best situation is when like most people know each other and then maybe a couple of people don't know 1 or 2 people. Because then there's enough social fabric for someone to kind of lead the conversation and for there to be some kind of, existing, whatever the word is. Do you know what I mean?
So, as usual, I don't actually have any original thoughts on this, but I have read something about this exact phenomenon. It was some random blogger that I follow. I can't remember who it was, but he was advocating for the sort of dinner party where you have 6 people, where one person invites 2 of his mates or her mates, and then each of those 2 invites 1 other person. And I think that makes 6. Does it? Is my math right?
Yeah.
No, it makes 5. It makes 5. Or some combination there. Oh, sorry. Where the host invites 2 people, each of those brings 1 person, and 1 person brings like an extra person or something like that, and that creates a dynamic whereby at most everyone knows only 2 other people in the group. And apparently that's like really good if you have like a 6-person dinner, because then there's a lot of actually getting to know each other and digging into stuff that you wouldn't necessarily talk about amongst like close friends who very well know each other, or amongst complete strangers who don't know each other at all.
Oh, that's interesting. So in that case, most of the group actually doesn't know each other, which is kind of the scenario today.
Yeah. So like, why was that dynamic weird? Like, did you feel that the conversation was more stilted than you'd have liked it to be, or what?
Yeah, I think so. I think also, maybe it was affected by the fact that we went for brunch at a place called the Breakfast Club, and the table was extremely cramped, and I think layout wise it wasn't very optimal. I don't know. Maybe it could have worked to a different sort of setting. But that's just something I was sort of thinking about, sort of like the right ratios of people who know each other and people who don't. And then the other thing thing was, so basically after this brunch, we all went back to someone's sort of apartment, and an interesting thing happened there where it was sort of like a classic living room where there's like a sofa, then there's like an armchair, and then there's the sort of TV is the focal point of the room. And I noticed that the fact that the TV was the focal point of the room kind of meant that by default someone turned on the TV and started browsing Netflix, ostensibly just to like put on something funny in the background or something. But then it kind of just turned into everyone watching an episode on Netflix at like 2 p.m. And I don't know how everyone else felt about this, but I mean, I personally wasn't super into it. And at one point I was like, wait, so what are we doing? Are we actually just going to sit here and watch episode 1 of Skins? And I think it was one of those situations where most people weren't into it, but they didn't want to, like, I don't know, be a naysayer or something. So no one really said anything, and we watched 1 episode of Skins.
So you sat through a whole episode of Skins just because no one was brave enough to be like, look, guys, I don't think anyone really wants to play Monopoly here.
Look, I threw my hat in the ring. I mean, look, Skins was fine. It was good. But I think the TV being the focal point of the room, actually, I think room layout is something I've been thinking about recently. Because I definitely know other kind of scenarios where, we're hanging out with a group of people and the room layout is such that it's much less conducive for like just sitting around and chatting. Whereas Ali, for example, when we've been on like a couple of these low social optionality holidays with your friends and we kind of rent some cottage in some, national park somewhere, the living room layout is basically a bunch of sofas all facing each other and the TV is never really a prominent aspect. And so I think that's just like much more conducive to socializing.
Yeah, I agree. Or like if it's a layout whereby the focal point is a fireplace, I think that truly leads to the ultimate form of social interaction. Like on all the trips that we used to do with the Wilderness Medicine Society, like inevitably there would be a fireplace in the cottage, and it would just create such a nice vibe. Everyone's sitting around the fire, a hug to the older caveman days.
Sorry, you cut out for a second there, but I assumed that what you said was interesting.
Wonderful.
Ali connecting with the masses, saying he feels much more at home with a nice hearth and fireplace with the television. Showing how in touch he is.
Right. Anyway, speaking of being in touch with the masses, the topic that we thought we'd do today is, given that we have you on, Jake, we thought it would be interesting to explore kind of what it's like to be a lad and what it's like to kind of be cool, traditionally defined as. How do you feel about this?
I feel that inviting me on means that you set a very low bar yourselves if I'm your representative from the cool community, but...
Hey, no one said cool. We said lad.
I know, and I deliberately avoided referring to myself as that, so well picked up.
So, Taimur, how would you define kind of lad for the non-UK listeners amongst our audience?
I guess my kind of my sort of heuristic for lad is in general someone who is quite into drinking, like.
Okay.
Quite into drinking, which seems to correlate with some level of sportiness and I guess kind of boisterousness as well.
Ooh, what do you mean by boisterous?
I don't know. I guess like if I imagined a group of lads in my head, A, they'd all be drunk. B, they'd all be topless. No, that's a joke. No, they'd be
insight into what goes on in your head, Taimur, but...
They'd be drunk and they'd be kind of loud in some kind of setting, like a pub or a club or whatever.
A pub or club or whatever. Okay.
So boisterous, sporty, and enjoying a drink can all be females as well. As in, do you think there's a female equivalent then, or in your mind, is it only really males that can be laddish in that way?
I'm sure there is a female analog, but I do think it is I think what we're talking about here is a masculine phenomenon. Like
perhaps next week, if we have Molly on the podcast, we can talk about the female analog of it.
I mean, is that? Do you think that's a reasonable description of lad, both of you?
Reasonably. I'd say so. Or it's at least what people aspire to be like if they're trying to be lads. As in, some people inherently probably don't actually enjoy going around topless, infiltrating your mind, Taimur, but feel the pressure to do so in order to fit that sort of image. So certainly I think that captures many of the elements of it. So
one thing that I've often been curious about kind of being a lad is that to what extent do you as Jake, as someone who is boisterous, enjoys a drink and pretty sporty, to what extent do you
Guilty.
like recognize those qualities within the group of people, or like within the group of lads that you hang out with, and like to what extent do you think that is the group dynamic that's going on? If that makes sense.
Have you seen How I Met Your Mother? You know, the cheerleader effect, which is an idea that sort of any individual cheerleader may not be that attractive, but as a collective, you sort of like hold them up on this pedestal and everyone thinks cheerleaders are attractive, whereby the sum of their individual parts is greater than, each one on their own. I feel like if you looked certainly on Cambridge swaps, some of the individuals there are sort of like properly intense mathematicians who spend all their time they're not on swaps kind of absolutely smashing out statistics. And if you actually look at the people that compose these groups, they don't stand up to much scrutiny as sort of conventional lads. But then when you put them all together,
could you describe what a swap is for the uninitiated?
So essentially it's a group of males, a group of females traditionally, although it can these days be any combination of genders. But traditionally it's particularly from one college to another college or one sports team to another sports team, go for a meal where food is largely collateral, and it's all about the beer, to borrow a phrase. But
okay, so for example, the men's football team from Emmanuel College might go drinking with the ladies hockey team from Magdalen College, for example.
They might do.
Okay.
They might do that. And I think, as a collective, many of the men in that group might try and sort of live up to a certain image and all behave in that way that you're talking about, sort of boisterous and drinking. But fundamentally, certainly at Cambridge, it was quite funny when you actually then looked at who these individuals were, and they're sort of, people who are about to take a kind of really dull, high-flying solicitor job in the city or something like that, or people who are fundamentally really sort of bookish and academic. I think people found a great sort of sense of purpose being on these swaps at times. Even people like you, Ali, would have felt included and laddish. But
Yeah, I'm sure I'd have been sort of significantly more boisterous had I ever been invited to one of these swaps. But hey, it's not that I'm bitter. I've totally gotten over it.
So, Jake, where would you? I mean, look, we're throwing around the word lad. It's like 10% tongue in cheek, I would say, and we're sort of labeling you as a lad, sort of tongue in cheek, and like I'm sure you would disagree with the label. Yeah, you wouldn't entirely want that label put on you. But like, where would you say you are on the lad spectrum? Like from Ali to Ali being most laddish, obviously.
I mean, I'm curious. I want to know who that you pick as the benchmark for the other end of the spectrum without slandering somebody. So go on, entertain me.
I'm trying to think of a celeb who'd
From
be
Ali
considered...
up to...
Yeah, to be honest, I don't really know. But like, yeah, where would you put yourself on like the lad spectrum?
like Ben Stokes or something. Do you know who that is?
No.
I think he's a footballer. Is he a footballer?
Okay, well, wonderful.
Wait, no, he plays cricket.
Excellent.
Ben Stokes, he's a cricketer. Is he the one who did that like amazing like dive for the wicket that got him like 6 runs or for like 2 runs in the World Cup or whatever that tournament was?
Cricketers aren't
Close
lads.
enough. I'm happy to let you keep talking for the amusement of your audience. Proof that expertise in some areas really doesn't always translate to good general knowledge, does it, Ali? But yes, Ben Stokes, for whatever reason. On a scale of Ali to Ben Stokes, I'm probably decreasing in my laddishness with time.
Yeah.
Because I think it's quite a young thing, essentially.
Yeah.
Certainly, if you look at people in their first year at university versus the ones that did 6 years at university, I think most sort of laddish tendencies decreased with time because it's a bit sort of exhausting and unsustainable after a while. But
So it sounds kind of like the political spectrum. In the first year, everyone is like hardcore leftist. And then over time, as they get older and start paying more tax, people veer towards the center, possibly even to the right, depending on which tax bracket they're in. Also, I've heard.
so you've heard, really. Yeah. Well, we all know where you stand thanks to you uploading a photo of your ballot paper on election day before taking it down.
We're not allowed to mention that. It's apparently it's technically illegal in the UK to upload a photo of your ballot paper on polling day, which I did. But so thank you, Molly, for messaging me immediately, being like, "What the hell is wrong with you? Please take that photo down."
All right, so
without the please.
Jake, in second year, where would you put yourself from like 0 to 10, where 0 is Ali and 10 is...
Second year was probably my annus mirabilis of laddishness, to be
Whoa,
fair.
whoa,
so.
whoa.
You're what? Sorry? Hold up.
It's my,
Jake
it's probably
studied
my
Latin at
peak,
school. He went to one of those schools, Tamar.
which are well represented on swaps, actually, incidentally. no.
So ceteris
Second year.
paribus, yeah, second year.
Second year, probably call it a 7 out of 10 or something, if I'm currently at about a 3. And Ali is just about troubling.
Wait, so you think you're
1.
currently at a 3 out of 10?
I'd hope not to be much higher than that.
Oh yeah, no, I suppose you still enjoy drinking, but you're not too boisterous about it.
No.
Also, I've heard.
No, I tend not to have the wherewithal to be boisterous after. But no, I'm not too bad. I would like.
And were you kind of on high up the lad spectrum in secondary school as well? Like
No.
Okay.
Oh, interesting. All right. So, how much of a lad were you in secondary school relative to university?
If I was 7 at university, 1 to 2 at school, perhaps.
But in school, you were also, sporty, I imagine.
Yeah.
And I imagine you enjoyed enjoyed drinking once the drinking became a thing? Or not really?
Yeah, it wasn't massive, like within school itself, certainly at my school.
Oh, I see.
And then there's the sort of negative multiplier of academic competence that sort of dampens down all laddishness. But then when you come to Cambridge, obviously that's a level playing field, and it sort of no longer adversely affects your lad points, so to speak.
So I suppose the more A stars you have at GCSE, the fewer lad points you end up with.
I suppose it's not conventionally cool or a feature of a lad to sort of absolutely smash it for the maths or something.
Okay, so in school, was the case that you wanted to be more part of the lad group? It was just that you were too academic to be accepted by them?
Not particularly. I think I correctly identified it was never going to be sort of my thing. But then obviously when you come to university, it can no longer be your thing to be like the academic one when you're surrounded by academic people. So I imagine at somewhere like Oxbridge, a lot of people would embrace the sort of lad idea because that's a new role for them in their group, whereas they were previously the clever one. If you take 100 people who used to be the clever one and then basically say only one of you can now still be the clever one, people have to adapt and find other roles if you want to be probably too analytical and overthink it, to borrow a phrase. But
So for example, at university, then, to what extent was this lad thing like part of your identity?
It's difficult to say. I wouldn't think it was too much, but then perhaps other people would look and perceive that it was part of mine or someone else's identity. So it wasn't something that I ever strived to like incorporate into who I was. But, you know, when you're in these societies or when you're in these groups, people on the outside would look and be like, well, that's clearly something that is important to you or something you want to do.
So did you sort of fall into it, or was it like you arrive at university, as you said, like there's only one clever one, and then it's like, okay, who do I like make friends with? Who seems like I might be able to relate to them? And you kind of gravitated towards those people, or like 6 months in, did you just look around and suddenly you're surrounded by these topless guys drinking?
Yeah, 6 months in, I looked around and was surrounded by topless men. So you've summed up my university experience to a T.
Actually, so I've actually got a story from like our first day of university, or like second day or something. We all the whole college like went punting, like all the first years went punting, and you and I were on the same punt, I think, or I was on an adjacent one.
Did I fall in?
And you fell in, but like once you got out and back into the boat, you had taken off your hoodie and your t-shirt, and you were fully topless, and everyone was admiring your abs because you had some level of abs at that point. And
wow, what a backhander!
At that point, I haven't seen your abs in a while. Actually, it's been a few days.
Lord.
Anyway, so then I distinctly remember when we got off the punt, because I think I had in my head that, oh, Jake's really cool because he's got abs. But then as we got out of the punt, there was some random guy who I think was one of the kind of punt coordinator type people, like, wearing he was like wearing an outfit trying to sell punt tours to unsuspecting tourists. But he made like a throwaway comment to you saying something like, he said something like, mate, it's okay to put that shirt back. It's okay to put that shirt back on now. And I just remember thinking that, oh, that's interesting, because in my head, like the fact that you had abs and you were topless was like a pure positive, like 100% value thing. Whereas for this guy, it was like his image of it might have been that you were trying to show off by being topless.
I think this event has probably put more of an indelible impression on you than it has on me. Yes, I know that there's probably a statistical significance to the amount of times I was the torso model in anatomy first year compared to just chance alone. But yeah, I don't know.
Okay, moving away from toplessness. Yeah. So what did you sort of naturally gravitate towards the lad group, or did it just kind of happen? Like, was it intentional on your part?
I wouldn't say it was intentional. I think, again, certainly at our university, there was a bit of a dichotomy between people that were sort of actually going to go out at all, and people that just wasn't their thing.
Okay, and by go out you mean go clubbing?
Out.
out.
So go to a
Out.
nightclub and drink. Yeah.
So yeah,
Or rather drink and then go to a nightclub, I think.
when there's sort of 100 or so people per year, and you take away sort of half of that who may not be interested in that for whatever reason, and then you sort of start narrowing down to a group of people, and you end up not actually having that many left, like overall. So the group of people that sort of went out, drank before, went to clubs, whatever, was probably small enough that they could all be reasonably my friends, for example. But
Oh, okay. And I suppose when that group is small enough, then the fact that you're all going out means you have this very shared experience that then becomes a source of conversation over like lunch the following day that, oh, you know, last night when old Johnny went out, God, he was absolutely wrecked, wasn't he? You know, and that kind of level of chat. But I suppose it becomes a shared experience that binds you together.
Yeah, it does. In the same way that I have friends who didn't go out, where your shared experience is your subject, or you know which part of the college you live in, or sports team or whatever. But that was another way in which people shared experience was going out.
Oh, so like in second year for me, like my main shared experience that I had with the people in college was that a group of us, about 15 people, used to get together and play Yu-Gi-Oh! A fair bit. And so that was our shared experience. Like a lot of the stories told over lunch and dinner would be related to stuff that happened while people were playing Yu-Gi-Oh!
So this is exactly the sort of person I was talking about. I was saying some people automatically drift away from you and the pool of eligible people shrinks down to quite a small number. So for the non-Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, there was a fair few people who did go out ultimately. But
So the at least in some sense, or like at least one group of people who others might have seen as lads, they just all had a natural inclination to wanting to go clubbing and wanting to get drunk. Is that kind of it?
potentially, but also it might have been that there was a pressure to do so, because objectively, Freshers Week is an absolutely ghastly clubbing experience, as in every single person. There are 4 or 5 clubs in Cambridge. There are about 20,000 students at the university, of whom all the first year ones, sort of, you have this big FOMO, like if I don't go out this week, I will not make friends for the next 3 years. And so everybody, even if you're feeling a bit rough or you just kind of weren't up for it and it was freezing cold, everyone would go out. So it might not be that it was a group of people who all really wanted to. It was a group of people who felt compelled to, that ended up, you know, sort of bonding with each other over those first few weeks. And then once you're a bit more secure in your friendships, you're like, no, objectively, that looks awful. Let's not go out tonight. But I don't fear that I won't have any friends this time tomorrow if I don't. So I think there is some of that. Whereas you clearly had the admirable level of security that you didn't, you know, you were quite happy not to even entertain going out and had confidence that you would be fine socially, which is good. And that's much more like what I would be like now at 26, but it's quite unusual, or at least admirable at 18, to just kind of think, this isn't my thing. This is objectively a bit unpleasant. I'm just going to boycott it.
Oh, I don't know. So I had a big, like, as I think everyone does, a huge insecurity about, you know, I'm really worried I'm not going to make any friends. And so a big part of me was thinking that, I have to go to these things and all these events and stuff. But I thought our college did a really good job of it, in that almost every evening there was an alternative Freshers Week event going on, whether it was like a movie night in the common room or whatever. And getting involved in societies like, you know, Pakistan Society and the Islamic Society meant that there was always kind of stuff going on. So I had a huge part of me was like, oh, you know, thank God I've got something to go to, and I'm not sitting in my room on my own.
And I think Cambridge was good for that, because the numbers are manageable. Like, I often think if you sort of go to somewhere like UCL and you're in a massive city of millions of people, you kind of are put in accommodation. There's about 10 people in your block or whatever, and you think, well, like, God, I better get on with them, because how else am I going to go about finding friends? And if they all start going out, you're like, well, I better go out as well. Whereas I think it is really good at somewhere like Cambridge. There are so many different small but manageable sized societies and things you can join that mean you don't have to sort of latch on to the very first people you meet and think, I've got to share all their interests in order to have any friends. But yeah,
I can certainly empathize with what you described, Jake. I think I remember in Freshers Week, I think there were like 2 nights where all the first years from the college were going clubbing, and I was like, wow, this is really not my thing. But because of the FOMO, I was like, okay, better go along. And it was just terrible. And after those 2 nights, I kind of concluded, I'm definitely not doing this again.
So one other thing that I've been curious about is, what's the experience of kind of clubbing with the lads out kind of thing like how would you describe it?
Gosh, in what sense?
Like, so the 2 or 3 times that I've been to a club, it's been very loud, very hot, very sweaty.
Yes.
I've maybe known about what 20% of the songs are, therefore it's kind of fun to sort of attempt to dance along with them while singing along to the songs. But for me, it was always more that I can sing along with the song than the fact that I could dance to it. And it was also sort of, we'd form a circle of like 4 or 5 people that I kind of went with, and we'd all just end up kind of like shouting the lyrics to the song at one another. And if it would be a song I didn't recognize, I'd kind of sort of be moving my hips in some semblance to the beat, and watching other people shout the lyrics of songs that I didn't know, like Mr. Brightside and stuff like that.
Mr. Brightside, it's a staple of my time at university. But I don't know, I think it's quite an interesting split between people who are single and people who aren't, because a lot of the things you've described are sort of objectively quite negative words, like hot, sweaty, loud, like these these are things that you don't attribute to a pleasant social experience normally.
Okay.
So it makes you wonder why people actually put up with it. And a lot of people who were sort of in relationships and had no interest of sort of going out to meet people in that way would look at these nights and just think, oh gosh, this is absolutely dreadful. And to a certain extent, I'd be more that way inclined now about sort of going clubbing. Whereas I think going out with guys, if a lot of you were single, there was always that sort of element to it, which made the rest of it like so in some way worthwhile.
So is that like, was that a big part of the decision to go clubbing then too? So maybe kind of hook up with someone? Like,
I think to a certain extent for some people,
okay,
but not everyone.
Because most people I've spoken to about this, like specifically like more girls than guys, say that, oh, I enjoy clubbing because I like the music or because I just like dancing. And I've always felt a bit skeptical of that particular line of logic.
I think some people do, and you can tell those people because then when they're still in pretty stable relationships, they still are agitating to go out. I never particularly, for all the kind of negative words you use to describe clubbing, I shared those views, and you know it starts making you sound a bit kind of weird and creepy if you're like, oh, you know, I only did it for those reasons.
Yeah.
But I think if you're sort of, you know, as you get older, or if you're not single, then certainly some of the negatives started outweighing the positives. But no, you're right. A lot of people, some people do have that thing that you're skeptical of, where they actually like it for what it is. And, you know, I'm not a dancer. I'm not a good dancer. Some people are, and they might enjoy dancing more. So yeah, some people probably go into it with other intentions and still enjoy it for what it is.
Okay. And so do you think that Tame and I, given that we don't drink and don't go out clubbing and didn't do that at university, I think, Tamor, is that right?
Yeah, I went clubbing 3 times in total.
Nice. And I think that's the same as me. Do you think, like, what aspects of the university experience do you think, like, we missed out on?
I think some of the funniest experiences were from the ridiculous behavior that, you know, resulted from the fact that people had gone out and particularly had been drinking. But thinking back on it, a lot of that was actually in the stuff before, like the pre-drinks or things like that.
Okay.
I always used to far prefer pre-drinks to actually going out, as in, because in pre-drinks you're sat with all your friends and no other people. You've got a seat. You've got like your own drink that you're not sort of paying ridiculous prices for in a club. Like you can actually hear each other speak. I always used to like that far more, and was always sort of actually a bit disappointed when we ended up going out, and would always sort of agitate to leave pre-drinks as late as possible and minimize the time spent in an actual club. So yeah, for all those reasons, I kind of sympathize with your position and think you didn't really miss out much clubbing wise. However, if you thought because I'm not going clubbing, I wouldn't feel comfortable or wouldn't think it was right for me to go to pre-drinks and therefore missed out on all of that sort of social gathering for a few hours before, then I'd say, yeah, that is, I would have considered that I'd be missing out. But certainly in clubbing itself, you've played it well. I don't think you missed out on too much, unless you like hearing The Circle of Life sung by a load of people in blazers at 2 a.m. But
I mean, that's quite fun, but it sounds like what you're saying is sort of seems to be the theme of this podcast, that actually really it's all just about social interaction and about trying to connect with your fellow man or woman or a combination thereof.
Yeah, I mean, I only speak for myself. Some people I know actually enjoy clubbing and are older than I am currently, you know, they might be married or whatever, and somehow still enjoy going to clubs. And I know a few people like that, and I'm not one of them, but, you know, I don't speak for them with what I've said about my experiences.
Cool. So moving away from the sort of club setting, I think one of the interesting things about sort of groups of people and kind of groups of people that are labeled, so either internally or externally, is that like the group kind of changes the behaviors of the individuals. And so when you're sort of hanging out with a group of lads, in what ways do you think you'd kind of behave differently than if you were sort of not hanging out with a group of lads?
Well, you know, I wouldn't say drink a concoction of mouthwash, shaving foam and chili powder if I weren't in a group or something like that. You do have the peer pressure side to it, but, you know, I don't think that's a revolutionary idea I've brought to the table there, that people play up to each other and do stupid things.
So is there some expectation to kind of do stupid things when you're in that kind of group? Like what results in these chili powder incidents?
What results in them? Drinking games, but ultimately, yes, the expectation. I think everybody sort of finds it a bit more fun if there's something stupid going on, and therefore it would you wouldn't be fitting in if you didn't play your part in that and just expected everybody else to provide cheap, mindless entertainment. So I think there is some expectation. And obviously in that group, you do things that you wouldn't just do probably sat in your room on your own. But yeah, you never felt compelled to do any of those things in your social groups.
No, but then like in my social groups, it was like the compulsion would be to have a hot take, some like new profound insight about like, Muslim marriage or something like that. That would be the thing that everyone would sort of egg each other on about. And then it would become almost an implicit competition of who can air the most controversial views without like upsetting the majority of people in the group. I think
there's a comparison with some of the swaps, who can say the sort of most outrageous fine or who has done the sort of most outrageous thing without obviously just being like illegal or kind of, just completely outrageous. So there's perhaps a similarity, but also definitely not who has the most hot take on the hadiths or something. I don't know. That was never a big feature.
The other aspect of kind of lad culture in inverted commas, like, said to 10% tongue in cheek, that I've been curious about is that there's this trope that like, especially in like high school situations where like the lads are the cool people and like then there's the nerds who aspire to be cool like the lads. Given that you were not allowed at school and you were allowed at university, kind of by most traditional definitions,
Fine.
Do you have any comments on sort of the wanting to be cool like those guys kind of vibe?
I think it depends. Like at our college, I don't think there was ever any sort of exclusivity about it, really, as in, I don't think we ever would have said XYZ cannot sit with us, cannot go on a swap if they want to. Other colleges would have had that. And then obviously sports team based ones, there is an inherent level of selection to that. But, I did some of the tennis ones, and within our team, there were good tennis players who were like mature students, had kids, were in their 30s, but were good at tennis. And obviously there was no judgment that they weren't going out with a load of 19-year-olds and like drinking gravy off each other's chests or something. So I think certainly in all both the main sort of ways in which I experienced these things was either through college society or through sport and tennis, and there was never really any judgment of people who didn't want to get involved in these things, and I'm pretty sure that there wasn't much of a exclusivity, like an us and them sort of feel to it. But it's easy to say that when you are one of the people. Perhaps I'm naive and there were people on the outside who thought in some way that they were being excluded. I don't know, and I wouldn't know necessarily.
Yeah, potentially. I think it's one of those cases where the people in the group like think that their group is all like inclusive and stuff, and don't really pay any attention at all to the outsiders of the group.
Yeah.
Sort of like, I think it's sort of like there's all this stuff in about like specifically in tech, which I'm vaguely familiar with, when it comes to sort of inviting speakers for conferences. And if you don't think about it, like inevitably the speakers that you invite to your conferences like end up being 95% male, and then you kind of look around and you think, oh crap, hang on, without thinking about it, we've just created this kind of group. And then the impression I get from tech Twitter is that women feel excluded even though there's no explicit exclusion going on. Whereas sort of, I suspect it's similar in sort of the kind of quote lad culture vibe, or the kind of lad group dynamic, whereby the lads are kind of self-selecting themselves just based on who enjoys drinking and like think that actually, anyone can just join in and have fun. But for the people outside of that group, it's a feeling of, oh, it's sort of, there's us on this side and then there's them. And I think in a way, like at least this was definitely the case for me and a few other people kind of who were non-lads that I spoke to. I think there was some level of jealousy that you lads had such a seemingly strong group and strong group dynamics, whereas I think there was an element of other people wanting that sort of thing for themselves but not necessarily to join the group.
Yeah, I think it's true that a lot of social things, certainly within our university, were within the context of drinking. And I can see how if that wasn't your thing, there were things that you just unwittingly would have been excluded from, not sort of by any explicit rule, but just because why on earth would you want to do that? And therefore, you would have, for example, with tennis, a lot of the social things were drinking based. So if you were someone who didn't drink but wanted to socialize with your teammates, some of the average social thing would have been quite unappealing to you, and there weren't necessarily loads of let's go bowling or let's do whatever, like some kind of non-drinking based activity. So I guess there could be an accidental level of exclusion of people like that. But yeah, and like you say, I think in every industry, people select people who look and sound and are like themselves. So I would imagine, even within somewhere like Cambridge, that the demographics and diversity of these societies was like more homogeneous than even Cambridge already is. but I have no data to support that. I just would imagine that white males, privately educated, are probably even more represented in these things than they are in Cambridge as a whole. But
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, and I suppose that's also a similar reason as to why when you get a kind of large heterogeneous group of people together, the Chinese people will inevitably hang out with each other, the Asian people will inevitably find a way to hang out with each other, and like occasionally you'll get the odd kind of like Asian person or Chinese person within the lad group, but it would be more unusual. You would expect to just see that kind of segregation in a very, very non-explicit way, but purely based on the fact that just by default you have this thing in common.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Does that so back when you were sort of a 7 out of 10, where
Ali's already told me I've lost my abs, so I don't know what I am now. But
Mate, I saw Jake's abs like 2 weeks ago and they were pretty on point. Like it really inspired me to like go to the gym a bit more, and then I went for about 2 more sessions and I haven't been for the last week.
Nice. I'm very happy for the,
Sorry
for the
to
two of
derail you.
That's fine. So yeah, back when you were sort of at peak lad, would you say that like, if you walked into a group of or a room of people, would you look at the people that outwardly seemed laddish and would you kind of think, oh, that's my tribe, like those are the people who are like me and I'm sort of drawn to sort of be friends with them?
I mean, maybe subconsciously. I'd like to think I never would have walked into a room and be like, I don't think to this day I would walk into a room and say, these are instantly the people I think from the outside I will get on with. But I guess we all do that to a certain extent, don't we?
So you're saying you don't do that? Or you're saying it's subconscious, like you're not really aware?
Well, I don't think I consciously go and think I'm going to make a superficial judgment on the people I think I will like in here, but that's what humans do, right? And I imagine, as you were saying, your Asians all found a way to hang out with each other. That initially is quite a superficial connection. You look at someone and think, I'm going to hang out with them.
Yeah.
So I guess we all do it to a certain extent, and therefore it's not inconceivable that I would have done that, but
okay,
never deliberately, I don't think.
Okay, so for example, if I were to walk into a party and there were, let's say there's two 3-seater sofas, right?
Yes.
And each of those are occupied by 2 people.
Yes.
One of them has sort of white rugby playing looking people on it,
Yeah.
and the other has sort of weedy Asians with glasses, kind of similar to myself on it. I would immediately go for the rugby lad. No. It's pretty obvious which group I would gravitate towards.
Yeah, and I suppose when you phrase it as like comically polarized as that, then I would go to the other one.
Oh.
But
But you want
not necessarily through any good reason, and I might end up moving. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess there's a lot of going for in these societies.
Okay, so if both of you weren't doing the same subject at the same college, so you guys both the same year doing medicine at Manual College, if one of you was doing a different subject, for example, if I don't know, Ali, if you were doing maths or something, do you think you guys would have ended up becoming friends?
Oh God, no.
No,
Absolutely.
Why is that? So Ali, why don't you think you would have ended up becoming friends with Jake?
I think the way we became friends was the way like a lot of people become friends at university, that you start by hanging out a lot and then you become friends.
Yeah, sure.
And the hanging out a lot happens by virtue of the fact that we're both medics.
Okay.
And in the absence of that both being medics connection, there would be literally no other reason why Jake and I would hang out. We were on the same badminton team for like a period of like a few months, sort of seeing each other once a week, if that, for the occasional badminton game. But that's not the frequency of contact that you need to be friends. I think had we kind of lived next door to one another, then that would have been a default way to hang out, and we've got a fair bit in common apart from the lad points, and so I suspect we would have become friends in that sense.
Yeah, and I think there's people you instantly gravitate to, but certainly some of the people I saw the most at the start of university I'm no longer friends with at all, just based on a lack of mutual interests and stuff. So I think, but it's quite unlikely that Ali and I would have come into contact enough through our non-medical shared interests.
Yeah.
I would not have been at the Yu-Gi-Oh sessions. He would not have been at the, sniffing Tabasco sessions or whatever it was. So we wouldn't have.
Sounds a lot like Paxok.
Okay, so you've both given a very safe answers of it's just circumstance, Yeah, I mean, so I've definitely openly said on the podcast before that there've been situations where I have been face to face with a lad, and my initial reaction is that we're not going to be friends, and then we end up spending some time together and we do become friends.
Yeah, in the social optionality situation where you have sure.
But do you? I mean, surely for both of you there is some aspect of Ali, even if you you were hanging out with Jake for a bit at the start before you've had a chance to probably know him, there must be something in your head of like, oh, this guy's not like me. We're not in the same tribe. And likewise for you, Jake. Surely you see Ollie there with his Pokemon cards, with his glasses, you know.
Yu-Gi-Oh cards. God damn it.
Sorry, with his Yu-Gi-Oh card. There must be some element of like, oh, this guy doesn't feel like he's in my tribe. Come on.
Yeah, as in like that would definitely be a thing on initial inspection. But like anyone listening to this podcast who's heard Jake speak and the way he talks, you know, would say he's more in line with the way you and I talk than you know one would expect by just looking at him purely stereotypically, being like, right, he's a lad, he looks sporty, he's white, he probably drinks a lot, you know. And so as soon as you have that first conversation and realize that you have stuff in common, at that point it becomes less a case of, you know, you are stereotypically the sort of person I would gravitate towards.
Okay, Jake,
I don't know about you, Jake.
What's your side?
What, my side on whether I would, like, I'm being too diplomatic, and I should say no, I never would have been friends with Ali.
I'd take
like,
one look
I think-
at him
Lift the
and
dirt.
run him off.
I mean, if I hadn't been sort of exposed to you, treating you like you're some kind of environmental hazard with that phrase or something. But yeah, I think it's unlikely that we would have gravitated, or I would have been like, that person who is playing Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm missing out if I don't go and actively go out of my way to incorporate that person into my circle. So I think it's unrealistic if I say that would have happened. But I think that's how sort of loads of friendships and relationships are. You're sort of brought together out of convenience, and then you stick with ones that you actually like, and the other ones are whittled away. But
yeah, sure, that makes sense. So on the other side of the coin to that, Jake, do you ever feel you've been sort of discriminated against or kind of judged harshly purely based on your
For being a straight white male.
yeah, exactly.
hashtag not all men.
Do you ever think you've been sort of judged harshly purely based on your external lad appearance?
No, I don't think I can ever get the tiny violins out and say that I had a really hard time, because people just look at my buys and start thinking I must be an awful person on the inside. No, whether or not it goes on, but I can't say it's ever particularly, you know, impacted on anything to the best of my knowledge.
That's interesting, because like certainly from my lad friends who I've talked to about these things, multiple of them do actually feel that way, where internally they don't see themselves as a lad at all. They happen to be on the football team and are kind of drinky, and so they're kind of bunched up with that group, but they feel like, you know, everyone sort of assumes lots of things about them just because they're kind of around those people, and you know, everyone sort of assumes sort of lots of especially the more problematic things around, you know, lads being misogynistic and all of this kind of stuff, when actually these individuals are not like that at all, and they feel like they've kind of been, you know, branded with the same brush as the rest. But you don't feel that way?
No, I think I know a couple of people who, sort of some of our friends who were in the rugby setup, were quite keen to sort of I don't think there was ever many big problems with the rugby team or anything, but they were quite keen to sort of set themselves up as not just kind of lumps of meat and just sort of people who were blues, and that was their defining feature. I think certainly some of our friends were quite keen to make the point that that wasn't their only defining feature. I don't think, you know, enough people would have cared about me or something to start having external judgments like that. And similarly, I'm not massively influenced by what other people think in that sense, so I wouldn't have been walking around petrified, looking over my shoulder thinking, oh, does everyone think I'm an arse because I brought a protein shake into a lecture? Probably. but it never particularly influenced my decision making, and I didn't dwell on it too much. So maybe I've walked around blissfully naive of how much of an arse everyone thinks I was for 3 or 4 years, but oh well.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so actually, kind of on that note, where do you think that kind of not caring what other people think comes from? Because it's something that we certainly get a lot of emails about, people saying that, hey, I struggle with, you know,
and I cannot
the way people judge
compare
me.
to be any, like, you are the absolute gold standard of not caring. When people, some of your roastings, I don't know whether I'd care if I got such like personal levels of hatred and vitriol that you get in your comments. So you're probably even better, even further along the spectrum of not caring. But I know to a certain extent you could say it comes from entitlement and sort of, you know, a security in where you are. So you have that entitlement at the moment because you're sort of successful and have a number of good streams of revenue, a couple of good jobs, you're like happy with your set, and you can kind of afford to be like, sod it, if you don't like me then crack on, because plenty of people do. And I suppose you could look at people who are sort of, you know, white, sort of, you know, have every sort of division, you're on the right side of it. You know, it's easier being male, being white, being this, being that. You could say it comes from a sort of sense of privilege that you don't have to care about what other people think. But yeah, certainly I don't think it's ever been something I've never been massively affected by it. And you even less so.
So are there any dimensions or aspects of the lad experience that you think we haven't touched on that you think might be kind of interesting to an outsider, a non-lad?
I think just the how much it's talked about these days. I think I was only at university for a few years, but the difference between, say, first year and by the time I was in third or fourth year, with how much of an issue it was and how much people fixated on it and were very keen to apply the label. It's one of those things, it's a bit like class. It's something that people are very keen to talk about without necessarily having a really watertight idea of what it is. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like today it's much more of an issue than it was even in like 2012 when we started. Not really sure why that would necessarily be, but I think people are very wary of it's a bit like, you know, most people would be absolutely mortified to be accused of, say, being racist, and it's sort of something where if you accuse someone of that, then they get very defensive and very sort of concerned that you've made that allegation of them. I think certainly today, if you went up to people and were like, I think you're part of lad culture, then certainly more now than in previous years, people would be quite concerned about that. And even, you know, coming on a podcast, oh yeah, Jake, do you want to come on the podcast? We're going to hold you up as an example of a lad and talk about that. Like, that is more of a concerning thing, I think, now from a kind of, you know, is this acceptable than it would have been a few years ago. And I guess that, you know, that might be a good thing, that it's not something that's unequivocally people aspire to, and because there are obviously some bad aspects of it, but yeah, I think the way it's treated is changing.
All right. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of our discussion then. Thank you for being so open with sharing your internal experiences of what being a 7 out of 10 lad looks like.
Yeah, and we have it on your good admission that you are now only a 3 out of 10, so you're not a lad anymore.
2 to 3.
But yeah, no, this was enlightening. Thanks a lot.
All right. So normally we end the podcast with an insight of the week, as you would know if you've ever listened to the podcast, which I don't think you have, but
no, no, it gets you negative lad points listening to this.
Yeah,
yeah, he's trying to stay at a 2 to 3, you know.
All right, so Tamar, what's your insight of the week?
Yeah, to be honest, I think I did my insight at the start, which was maybe a mistake. But yeah, just something I'm thinking about is like, ratios of like, basically the right sort of group setup in terms of who knows whom, and then also the right physical layout of spaces. Because today, for example, I think everyone was really nice. I think I definitely will be hanging out with these people again. I don't think the group setup was optimal. I don't think the physical layout was optimal. But yeah, that's been on my mind. What about you?
So one thing that I'm not sure if I mentioned this that's Alexa that just got activated. One thing that I can't remember if I mentioned this last week, but it was this perennial struggle to figure out what to do with my life. And I think it was this week, possibly last week, I came across a video by my YouTuber colleague Unjaded Jade, which was entitled "How to Figure Out What to Do with Your Life" or something. And she kind of proposed this concept that she learned in university called the Odyssey Plan, which is the idea that you ask yourself 3 questions. Firstly, you ask yourself that what would my life look like in 5 years if I carried down the same path that I'm currently on? Then you ask yourself, what would my life look like in 5 years if I took a completely different path? And then you ask yourself, what would my life look like in 5 years if money and social obligation were no longer a factor that was feeding into my decision? And so I wrote out like sort of what my normal day in the life would look like when I'm 30. And it was like, I'm 30 years old. I'm in a part-time training program in anesthetics. I'm living in Cambridge, maybe married at that point, fingers crossed, inshallah. Very good, Jake. And like doing like physiology supervisions on the side. And I kind of read that, and there was a part of me that felt a little bit depressed in a way because it just seemed so pedestrian in the sense that it seemed like
this is problematic.
It seemed like there was nothing exciting or interesting or fun about it. I could very easily see the path from A to B. And it was sort of like something that we've discussed earlier about the idea of window openers versus door knockers, and about there being 2 types of people in the world. The window openers are the ones that kind of see their outcome in front of them and then they do what it takes to get there, whereas the door knockers are the ones who kind of knock on the door of opportunities whereby you actually have to open the door to figure out what's on the other side. Like, it's not that obvious. And I felt I was very much a window opener if I continued down this path of that I kind of set for myself, that the dream is to be a part-time doctor and part-time medical educator. And so after having this crisis of purpose in a way, I came to a big realization yesterday. No, actually, the other insight that kind of added to this was I came across a highlight that I highlighted like 10 years ago when I was reading Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek, which was talking about how when you're at a crossroads in life and you've got different decisions to make, you should ask yourself which of these is going to be the more exciting option. And in a way, excitement becomes a proxy for happiness or meaning or whatever. And if you optimize for excitement at each junction, chances are you'll have a pretty good life, however you define that. And so I was hanging out with a few friends yesterday who, interestingly, moved to America to be doctors, mostly because it would be an interesting adventure. And so talking about this idea of adventure with these guys has really opened my mind to the possibility that maybe moving to another country, maybe even America, to be a doctor would just be infinitely more exciting than staying in Cambridge and continuing down the path that I've already set for myself.
That's a nice revelation. I certainly back the I like the optimizing for excitement / adventure thing. And actually, I think subconsciously or semi-consciously, I've sort of used that as a heuristic multiple times, particularly when deciding to go on low social optionality holidays or trips with people, when otherwise it would seem like, whoa, this is a lot of money and all this kind of stuff. And like spending time abroad and that kind of thing. So I certainly back that. Yeah, I especially back the living abroad. Though I personally think that living abroad in the US will be significantly less interesting than living abroad in a less Western English speaking country.
Yeah, true. I mean, there is some element of the US having various other advantages, namely the fact that they speak English and that being a doctor in the US is generally, pretty good. But anyway, Jake, have you got any insights that you've been thinking about this week?
No, I've just been thinking about your career plans actually, and they challenge my own in the sense that I quite like having a set predefined path, but at some point I think what I've always wanted is to do things that will enhance my future sort of like life portfolio, life CV. So if I do this, then it will look good on an application for this, and then that will look good on an application for this. And I just think at some point I'll probably actually need to do something because I actually want to, rather than because it furthers my chances of doing the next thing. And because listening to your thing, I think, at some point you're going to have to settle down, and are you just delaying doing that? But similarly, if you're actually enjoying these things, then that's an end in itself. That's like an outcome that I wouldn't normally actually think of as an outcome because it's not sort of quantifiable. So I could probably learn from your complete gung-ho approach to just doing things. I think the whole excitement thing is a bit of a weird one because some things that are exciting are, like tonight I will either go to bed at a reasonable time or I could just go on an absolute mad bender on my own. And that is, that it would be more exciting by most sort of metrics, but it would also just be an abjectly terrible idea. So sometimes things are exciting. And I've seen, I don't know how many of your indiscretions are public knowledge, so I'll try and be vague, but crashing things into buildings, getting arrested, things like that are all exciting, but every so often you can do something that's exciting with fairly adverse consequences. So I wouldn't always seek excitement.
Oh, interesting. So it almost sounds like perhaps sort of exciting in the moment isn't the right heuristic then. Perhaps it's something like, in 25 years when I look back on my life, will I be which of these would make the better story?
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with that because, I could either just crack on straight through training in a linear fashion and get it done and be a consultant, or I could take a bit of time out, travel, see some new things, go live abroad. And then if you look back in 25 years time, will I think, gosh, I wish I'd been a consultant for 26 years currently rather than for 25, or would I think it was invaluable to have done that extra bit of traveling? Say all that and completely disregard my own advice and probably just going to crack on with it. But I do agree with that more because it's very easy to get sort of really narrow-minded in the present. But yeah, looking back, I don't think people regret travel or sort of time spent doing things they enjoy when they're young and healthy, particularly when you get to an older age. You don't really hear many people say oh, I wish I'd saved up a bit more so that I last longer in my care home or something, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would be more inclined to agree with that than the analogy that means I should probably go out and fez tonight.
All right. On that topic, I'd just like to throw a final heuristic into the ring, which is something we talked about a few episodes ago around expanding the box, that basically the box of life scripts that we've been exposed to. And I think, optimizing for excitement, obviously, would result in Jake going on a mad one tonight, which wouldn't be good for him. I think optimizing for storytelling, it feels a bit brittle. It feels a bit shallow as a heuristic. I think optimizing for exposing yourself to different sort of ways of living, that I think that I've certainly found that useful, and I think that's
So
what
you're
we're trying
saying
to get at.
that? So you're saying that if I go on a mad one tonight, that will expose me to a different way of living.
Yeah.
Well, Jake's already been exposed to that. That's well within his box of possibility, his life script. Whereas it's completely off the beaten path for me. So
Exactly.
I guess I'll be having a mad one.
Cool. All right. I think that ends this episode. Jake, thanks a lot for chatting to us. This has been very interesting. As we said at the start, we now have a Twitter account, so follow us at Noverthinking on Twitter, and we'll be posting updates there.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. All right.
Cool.
How do we think that went?
It's all right. Funny enough.
Do you think we painted you in a bad light, Jake? Yeah, because you were hesitant, right? You were like, oh, I don't want to be the lad.
I don't think so. I think, whenever you guys are a lot more used to putting yourself in the public sphere than most other people are, particularly Ali. I doubt I've said anything that's incompatible with with my life or career.
Yeah.
But, when you put yourself out there, people will pick up on certain things and agree or disagree. What's your normal audience?
It's hard to say, really. Like, I was looking at the stats. It seems like about 20% of listeners are in the UK, like 10% USA, I think like 7 or 8% Germany.
What
and it
overall
says,
numbers?
Like literally all over the world. Each episode gets about 15,000 downloads.
That's funny.
Ish, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I trust Molly as an arbiter of whether I've completely put my foot in it. I don't think so, particularly.
No, I think that was fine.
Yes,
I don't
Molly.
think, I think that was pretty respectable for everyone.
So how do you feel about the fact that this discussion is going to be heard by 15,000 random people around the world? Is it just like feeling like, whatever, just don't care?
Yeah, that's fine.
Nice.
That's all right. It's not a problem.
Yeah, I think that's a good attitude to have, because I feel like a lot of people in your position would feel more stage fright at being on something like this.
I have no stage fright about, tons of people listen to it and disagree or think it's a load of nonsense or whatever. But I think with the whole medicine thing, there's always the gnawing,
The
putting
remote
us a-
possibility that
that someone
perhaps someone
and
will
it's
take
just
offense
more,
to something
that it's
or
more
other.
hassle than it's worth, essentially. But
interesting.
but I think that's not specific to this. I would think that about doing almost anything in the public domain. So it's not because of your questioning.
Oh, I'm glad. All right, it's good sesh, lads.
Cool, good stuff. Ali, I'll send you the file.